G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with episode 15 in my partial book reading of One Crowded Hour, Tim Bowden's biography of Neil Davis, combat cameraman extraordinary. Episode 15 being the concluding third part of chapter 15, Gooks, Dinks and Slopes. Relics of the days before political correctness had been funked up. And preemptive white supremacists ruled the world. So, to back it up a bit, during some home leave in 1967, Neil Davis was interviewed on ABC television in Melbourne about the way Vietnam War footage was being censored in Australia. Letter to Aunt Lillian, 1 May 1967. It seems my personal fortunes are going up and down. The ABC is very angry about the interview I did in Melbourne. Apparently the general manager, Mr. Duck Manton, was watching it and immediately rang a senior news executive to ask if it was so about the censorship. The man was off guard, off balance, and made the foolish blunder of saying outright no. Then an article appeared in the Australian newspaper quoting me. So at the moment, Duck Manton has taken the word of his senior news executive, bracket, as of course he should, but when it is pursued further, this will not stand up. Anyway, I'm right and they are wrong, so I'm not worrying at all. The political repercussions of the drastic 1968 Tet Offensive were felt worldwide when President Lyndon Johnson announced he would not seek a second term in office. The US started to pull American troops out of Vietnam, and Davis's company Viz News wanted to do the same with him. Viz News believed that because Americans were coming out, the war was over. I don't know why they thought that, because the war continued at exactly the same rate for another 7 years. The only difference was that there were more South Vietnamese soldiers being killed to replace the Americans who weren't getting killed anymore. In September 1968, John Tullow of Viz News visited Hong Kong and wrote to John Hartley, the managing editor in London, that something urgent had to be done about Davis to stop him being poached by the Americans. Tullow suggested that Davis be made a bloody good offer as soon as possible. It would, said Tullow, be a savage blow to Viz News if they lost him. Viz News executives in London felt that Davis had done enough, and it was time to move him back to head office for a spell and then perhaps go to some other posting in a less hazardous part of the world. John Hartley had also heard that Davis was suffering from back trouble and recalled him to London for talks on the Vietnam situation and for medical consultations. For Davis, a London winter was a severe culture shock. Letter to Aunt Lillian, 19 January 1969, White's Hotel, London. Well, I'm still cold. I think the English people are equally as cold in some ways. I didn't realise how accustomed to Asia I had become, or Tasmania too, I suppose. You know, I like to walk down the street and talk to people. And in Saigon and other Asian cities, everybody's so happy with so little and so always anxious to talk. But everybody here is in such a hurry and doesn't have the time or the inclination to worry about others. However, my company has been very good and wined and dined me. Davis thought he might have damaged his back in South Vietnam jumping from a helicopter when the pilot told them he couldn't land because of enemy fire. Davis, in full kit, plunged 2 metres to the ground. Many years later, the affected disc in his back collapsed completely and he was operated on in Bangkok. But in London in 1969, Harley Street specialists could find nothing wrong with him. They came up with an ingenious explanation. It was all in the mind. He was suffering from battle fatigue, a stress syndrome in which the nervous system reproduced pains in areas of old injuries or wounds, even though they had totally healed. Letter to Aunt Lillian, 7 February 1969, White's Hotel, London. I won't be returning to Saigon until May at least. 3 doctors say I'm suffering from battle fatigue, which is a bit of a laugh. My bosses seemed a little surprised and even disappointed when I didn't throw a fit when they told me. I won't be able to go near any fighting for 3 months. Davis resisted Viz News' efforts to move him from Asia, negotiated a new contract, and returned in 1969 on the understanding that he would not go back to Vietnam for 3 months. By June, he was back in Saigon and fully operational again. When Cambodia came into the war in 1970, Indochina was clearly going to stay the world's top story. Davis continued to turn away offers from American television networks and stayed loyal to Viz News, but strain developed in their relationship. The operational difficulties of providing a news film service from Asia, let alone from a war zone there, prompted some queries on the efficiency of Davis's operations towards the end of 1969. It became apparent that head office had very little understanding of the way he operated. In November, the editor of Viz News, Tony White, wrote a memo querying, among other things, the number of assignments shot by Davis in 6 months from 1 April to 30 September, the costs incurred in that period, why he had not worked from Singapore or Malaysia, and why his excess baggage costs were so great. In a further memo of 26 December 1969, the editor of the day at Viz News, Peter Marshall, wrote that Davis seemed to have become too remote from, quote, our prime objectives and requirements, unquote. He added what must be one of the great understatements from a chair-born head office man. Obviously there are problems of communications, contracts, contacts, security, etc., which we do not experience elsewhere. Davis's sharply argued 9-page response to White's queries left London in little doubt as to their man's dedication, operational efficiency and fieldcraft, but he was obviously hurt by the implication that he was doing less than his best. He detailed 43 assignments carried out in the 6 months under review. Here is one routine assignment from that report. Arvin Search VC Cradle, filmed 4th to the 6th July 1969. The cradle is the birthplace of the Viet Cong, an area in the Mekong Delta where few troops still venture. It is alive with booby traps. It is totally VC. It is difficult and dangerous to even reach there, and obviously dangerous when one is there. Our opposition have never covered this area. The filming was actually done the 4th to the 6th July, but I left Saigon City at a little after 0600 on the 3rd of July. Could only get the Can Tho in the Delta that day, where I received an up-to-date briefing on the area I was interested in. Before dawn the next day I left again and finally arrived at My Tho, the Arvin 7th Division headquarters. Finally there I was able to get a jeep to Ben Tre by road and ferry through VC-controlled territory. From Ben Tre, I hitched a ride on a chopper to the field where a reconnaissance company of the Vietnamese 7th Division was operating. Reconnaissance companies in the Vietnam War mean those that precede a larger sweep in order to seek out and engage the enemy, then hold them off while the larger units can reinforce. I spent the night of 4 July in the field in Quien Hoa province, sometimes walking, sometimes catching a rest in a swampy paddy field. From before dawn on 5 July till at least 1 hour after dark, we operated non-stop through paddy fields and jungle, across streams, through VC villages, all studded with booby traps. I spent the night of 5 July the same as 4 July. On 6 July we started again, of course, before dawn, and I managed to get a chopper out at 0800. This was the first resupply since I landed. I carried food for the time I spent in the jungle as always. By great good luck I managed to get 3 quick chopper rides and arrived back at Tan Son Nut Airport by 10 o'clock, the fastest I can remember from the Delta. I did complete shot lists and scripting immediately and managed to buy, bribe, the package aboard an aircraft before noon. I managed to get a shower by 1400. On 1-2 July I made at least 6 different calls in person to obtain full permission for this coverage. So besides 3 to the 6th July out of Saigon and 2 nights in the jungle, at least several hours were spent on this job on 1 or 2 July. We obtained exclusive footage. Is this again a statistic? Would AHW care to give his opinion on what he thinks might be a fair thing to take off after this little jaunt? This is classed as one job, so surely a little more attention can be paid to circumstances. Oh, I took no time off. those days just become normal working days. A London-based Viz newsman, Tom Hudson, visited the Asian area at this time and on his return weighed in with a memo to Tony White. It read, January 10, 1970. I approached the region with the attack of a Europeanised headquarters mind. Just couldn't see what the reasons were for delays, non-arrival of film, communications unanswered, transportation breakdowns, official obstinacy, mishandling of freight, etc., etc., etc. I soon learned. It's Manana land. I likened working there to trying to run in the sea with water up around your neck. Sometimes you are held to a frustrating speed despite the effort involved. Hudson graciously admitted that Neil had not become remote from Viz News's prime objectives and requirements. Generally speaking, there is no such thing in Southeast Asia as a straightforward assignment. He concluded, I admit that my first reaction to Neil was that we should remove him from this area and replace him. On second thoughts, I don't think this would be such a good idea. His replacement would have to be a white. Get that? Have to be a white, single, good, story-minded cameraman, a good technician, administrator, with unbounded patience and good humour, with an excellent knowledge and understanding of this peculiar area. My experience among his contemporaries leaves me with a distinct impression that Neil is apparently the best of those available. All the boss man from Pommyland had to do was go and have a go himself at getting a story through to figure out that Neil Davis was the best there was. Here endeth episode 15 and chapter 15 of One Crowded Hour, Tim Bowden's biography of Neil Davis. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. Arr.